Coming up, it is the wild card weekend matchup that we've all been waiting for. The New York Football Giants will travel to Minnesota. We break down all the key injury updates, discuss some matchups from that previous meeting earlier in the season, and whether or not the Giants maybe are coming in with just a little bit of an edge. We'll break it all down next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast. My boy Doug Norrie, and yonder there is the healthy, wealthy, and wise, the season generational ticket holder, the playoff prepared, Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir?
I'm doing good. I told you I had some work stuff to do in the city yesterday. Went out to dinner. Ended up, running into, of all people, Lizzo was at the restaurant. So, the food was pretty good if you're if rubbing elbows with celebs.
Did you little shake the hand? How are you? Good to see you. Kiss on the cheek. I mean, what are we talking about?
She had 3 different security people with her. Okay. So it was one of those you just admire from afar, Adam.
And you thought 2 security guards, you're going for it.
Right. I could take the first one, karate chop the second if things get a little hairy. But the third one, that's really where I call it quits.
Mm-hmm. That's when you get caught. That's when you get caught off guard. Smart on your part. All right. Well, Lizzo, I like that. Can't say I've met her. Can't say I've had the pleasure. Although neither is Andy, but just a visual. Anyway, the New York Football Giants, obviously Minnesota Vikings Wildcard Weekend. We cannot wait for this game to happen, man. I haven't even figured out what I'm going to be doing for Sunday, just in terms of I'm going to be entrenched in my own apartment. Let's just be clear. It's going to be all the window shades are drawn. It's blackout, all other noise and sounds and functions, and just zone in completely onto this matchup. But coming into it and really coming out of the end of the regular season, we knew the New York Football Giants were dealing with some injuries that they were trying to get everyone ramped up to 100%. And then likewise on the Vikings side, I think there's actually a really key area that we can look at where the Giants can hopefully take advantage. But starting with Big Blue, Andy, run down the key players that won't be available for Sunday.
Ooh, let me see. Just checking my notes. Looks like everyone practiced, Adam. I don't know.
And in that way, as Brian Daboll reported on Wednesday, he said, yep, everyone was at practice. Everybody was a full go. This seems to be, obviously knowing the Giants are in the playoffs, a big check mark of success. When we talked about it all down the end of the season, especially around Adoree Jackson, of like, we really going to risk not winning a key game here or there, right? We're going to risk being down to the wire and needing a win against the Eagles in Week 18. It all went according to plan. And now, whether or not everyone is actually 100%, we know nobody is, but you have Leonard Williams back. You were able to get him some extra rest down the end of the season. Adoree Jackson, you were able to just completely save for the postseason game here. How much do you think that matters just from, I don't know, from a health standpoint, but let's maybe tease a little bit of a potential negative or drawback here. Some of these guys haven't seen a lot of reps over the last few weeks either. You think there's any rust that needs to get knocked off?
Yeah, Dan Duggan of The Athletic came out also. Even though everyone practiced, he said, yes, feel great about Leonard Williams and Azeez Ojulari. He said, we'll still wait and see about Adoree Jackson. He was practicing, but knowing that he's coming off such a long time for this injury, like you don't necessarily know. It's encouraging to see him practice because he hasn't, but it doesn't 100% guarantee he's going to be out there. So even if he is, Adam, to your point, it's been 6, 7, 8 weeks that Adoree Jackson has been gone. And, to be able to thrust him out there and say, go against arguably the number 1 wide receiver in all of the NFL is probably not how you want to slowly get him back acclimated to the defense.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. Now, we know that the Giants played the Vikings down the stretch of the season. We know that it came down to a last-second field goal, and we can point to a couple of different moments in there, including a little friendly reminder that Kirk Cousins gave some opportunities for interceptions that the New York Giants were unable to secure. So turnovers were there to be had. So I'm optimistic that we'll get some sample of Adoree Jackson, but we just saw this with Xavier McKinney. He came back, and it was like, yeah, he's back. For, whatever it was, 7 to 12 reps, right? Like it wasn't a fully back. So I think in a lot of ways, you are kind of hedging your bets here. And you've seen this around the NFL a lot when it comes to the playoffs of like, I know it looks rough if we don't have our best players out there, even at a diminished capacity. But you think about if we can get through this first matchup, I think I'd rather have, right, 85% of Dory Jackson the following week if we get there, as opposed to a 65% of Dory Jackson that maybe gets injured, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of things to consider there. I want to flip over to the Vikings side of it because, relatively speaking, there's no concerns for the New York Football Giants. They're going to go in pretty confident here. But this is what I think is interesting. Minnesota is going to be down already with Garrett Bradbury at center position, who missed the Vikings' final 5 games of the regular season. Looks like he could possibly return for the Sunday afternoon game. He's listed as questionable right now. But then you also have, beyond Bradbury, Brian O'Neill, who was, of course, the strong right tackle for them. He was there for the rematch, and they have uncertainty around him coming back here. He's not going to play. Brian O'Neill will not play. I want to make sure I get all 3 of these guys right. And then Blake Brandel, who started 3 games in place of the injured left tackle Christian Darrisaw earlier this season. He was designated for return from injured reserve and is expected to be available for this game. Does it sound familiar? Does it sound like the Vikings are experiencing something across their offensive line that we could really tap into with just uncertainty? A lot of ours was just about who's good enough and who should be starting. But I look back at that first matchup here and I say, we know Kirk Cousins is not a mobile quarterback. He's not Tom Brady statue, but there's going to be real opportunities for the Giants to get pressure. And I think that up front, you mentioned Azeez Ojulari, you mentioned Leonard Williams, obviously Kayvon Thibodeau, obviously Dexter Lawrence. Like, I think the first point of attack here for Big Blue to have a successful game plan is to have the front. We know Wink will bring blitzes, but to have those guys up front, get after Kurt, get some pressure on him, and try to force him off his spot so he can't make those easy on-time throws.
You mentioned Garrett Bradbury. I think that's a really important name. He's been out since early December. He is their starting center. Adam, he's a good starting center too.
Yeah.
He's got a 70 Pro Football Focus rating. He's very solid in the run block and pass block game. It is a huge benefit if he does not play. He returned to practice, albeit in limited fashion. He's had a lower back injury for over a month now. It will be interesting to see if he gives it a go. Keep in mind, the players around the league voted their all-pro group, and the Giants had 1 across all positions, and it was nose tackle Dexter Lawrence. So
Yep.
when you think about how important the interior offensive line is to the Minnesota Vikings, we obviously, one of our strongest parts is Dexter Lawrence coming up the middle, trying to get pressure on Kirk Cousins, who we know isn't the most athletic quarterback out there when we think about being able to make moves with his legs. So for me, I think the injuries across the offensive line are very fascinating, knowing that that's one of our strongest areas on the defensive line side.
Yeah, 100%. So, I look at that and I hopefully think as we go back to this previous matchup and remember that when we looked back there at the team stats inside of that game, and it's worth reminding everybody that the Giants obviously came up just short in that one, but they played them even on in terms of first downs, even on passing first downs, beat them in rushing first downs, like all these, little statistical categories. One of the ones that's a big area of concern on both sides and why I bring up that offensive line for the Vikings. Listen, the Giants were just 3 of 11 on third down, 6 of 13 for the Minnesota Vikings on third down. Those key conversions when it matters most and being able to, again, get that pressure and hopefully create some opportunities to switch field position, etc. By and large, though, when you go down this list here, looking over at penalties in that game, this is another big one for me. The 7 for 63 for the Giants, just 2 for 14. So a very clean game. Played them even in terms of time of possession. And then it was the turnovers, right? It was the turnovers, 2 turnovers, a fumble lost, an interception for the Giants, clean for Minnesota. And that's why when we go back to that idea of, hey, those opportunities to get some turnovers, kind of critical. Now, my question to you would be, do you think that the Giants come out of that? And I want to bring up some of the other defensive stats that we had in this game for individuals. But do you think the Giants come out of that thinking, okay, clean up those mistakes? Like, listen, the fumble, let's just not have that be the case. We remember that one came. That was on the tight end did it.
Daniel
It was
Bellinger.
Bellinger. Yes. I could not get to the name there. I want to say something with a B and it was going to be Buster. Yeah. So Bellinger, obviously that fumble on a big play too, right? Like in a key moment, he fumbles that one. You have the interception, obviously, as well, that comes in that game. Do you think the Giants look and just say, don't do that? And we're in a game where maybe we're leading in the fourth quarter. Maybe Minnesota has to chase us a little bit and puts our defense and Wink Martindale in a better position to be disruptive against Kirk Cousins and the Vikings.
Yeah, I mean, the Giants were that close. It was 27-24, Adam, and you mentioned the Giants lost the turnover battle 2-0, and
Mhm.
that really is the big difference in the game. If you clean up the turnovers, that's 2 extra possessions the Giants get. That's 1 less possession that or 2 less possessions that Minnesota gets, but 1 that they immediately went down and basically scored on us. When
Mhm.
you think about changing that, if it does show how close these teams really are in terms of, what the score can end up being. To me, I think the Giants look at it and say, we were on the road. We played relatively well. We were missing 2 of our defensive stalwarts, and we still gave it a really good game. We were tied with under 2 minutes to go. And when you think about that from a Giants perspective, you say, hey, give me a couple reinforcements,
Mhm.
limit the turnovers, and we like our chances. We like to see where the chips fall at that point.
So then the other thing is too, like the Giants outgained Minnesota in this game because the rushing attack was there and they were able to stymie Dalvin Cooks in a lot of ways, although only 3 for 13 in the passing game too. But 12 for 133 for Jefferson, 13 for 109 for TJ Hawkinson. On the Giants side, it was very balanced. This was the Richie James, Isaiah Hodgins show, each with 8 catches, 90 and 80 yards respectively, and obviously the touchdown for Hodgins there. Slayton contributed 20 yards a clip there, 4 for 80. Like this was an 8 catches for Saquon Barkley, right? Like you talked about them over the course of this week. The Minnesota Vikings defense, that secondary being suspect. There's so many areas that seem like you can go and expose here. Do you think that the Giants are comfortable just saying, hey, Jefferson and Hawkinson are going to eat? Because I do have my secondary concern is this. One, there's nothing that you're going to be able to do to completely eliminate Justin Jefferson. You talked about, and I'll let you give your perspective on maybe doing just a double team all game with him. But even if you do, TJ Hawkinson to me is going to be the biggest problem in this game from a open space, right? Kind of a secondary thought when you have a guy like Jefferson on the field because the Giants don't have someone you stick on him, right? We don't have a linebacker that remotely does it. I guess Landon Collins might be your best linebacker safety kind of guy, mix in some Julian Love, but in a lot of ways it's the height, it's just the size, right? It doesn't matter how you approach that. We know I know what Jefferson is. Do you try to pick your poison there in any way, or do you play this straight up? Because I actually have a pretty, I think I have a strong opinion about what they should do. I think I do.
Oh, it's a very difficult question that you're asking, Adam. I don't know if I have the answer because, to your point, it's not like we say eliminate Justin Jefferson, but at that point, 16 targets for T.J. Hawkinson. You mentioned the 13 receptions; they were both unbelievable in that game, which causes problems. You can't double team both. You don't really have an answer over the middle. What I will say is, what will be different about this game, and someone that has come on for the Giants since being acquired is Jared Davis. So Jared
Yeah.
Davis comes in as a linebacker, is a pros pro, 28 years old, was a first round pick in 2017. He comes in and he is, solidifying that middle linebacker position. I think having him against TJ Hawkinson provides us a little bit more depth. And when you think about Wink, changing up the schemes a little bit more over the middle, a heavy dose of Landon Collins and Jared Davis to me gives us a chance to maybe put TJ Hawkinson a little bit more at bay.
Yeah, and I wonder, again, you're worried about the over the top stuff. It's something the Giants haven't given up in the secondary a ton this season. They keep things in front of them. In that game, it was an average, in spite of those big numbers for those two players for the Vikings. It was an average of 5.2 yards per pass play for the Vikings, and that's 2 yards under their season average for Kirk Cousins, right? So again, I think the numbers are going to look bad in some spots, but it doesn't mean that the overall can be successful. And that can include the fact that when you looked at it, Adam Thielen, nothing doing. Again, mentioned Cook not having anything going out of the backfield as a receiver, right? So I think you can manufacture success and not necessarily worry about stat lines, just worry about totality. Don't give up the one big 65, 70-yard touchdown play that can really be a backbreaker in this one. And the other thing that I want to mention, because we talked about the defense for the Giants and the offensive front, and I do want to, Davis is a good one to bring up here. But remember, 4 sacks, 6 tackles for a loss, 7 pass deflections, and 11 QB hits in that game. I'm going to make it very simple. I think you have to repeat that kind of performance and maybe even a little bit better if you're that front for the defense for the New York Football Giants. It's just the opportunities are there, and even though 4 sacks is still good. I'd like 5. I'd like 6. I'd like 13. But the 11 hits, like that matters because it means that you're being disruptive. And then when you look at those pass deflections, I think that that matters too, because again, when you are a team that's as explosive as the Vikings are, so much of that is about timing and is about rhythm. And you're kind of running the risk reward. Hey, get some pressure, be disruptive. And then, yes, if it's the 3-step drop and he gets it out of his hands and he gets it into Jefferson's, watch out. There could be problems, but you have to live with that and then kind of accept. You mentioned Davis. Jalen Smith is not going to be a guy that's going to be necessarily the best at closing in open spaces on receivers, the swarming mentality, but you're going to have to rely on the secondary. You're going to have to rely on McKinney, rely on Love, rely on, listen, I don't know if Cordell Flott will see any time in this game. Maybe some Dane Belton. You mentioned Dave. Like, you have to have the swarming mentality when it comes to these things, because a lot of it's going to be force Kirk Cousins to go to his safety valve first before getting that full developed play, and then shut it down quick. I mean, that has to be the approach that you take defensively here if you want to get sustained opportunities on that side of the ball.
It's interesting how the Vikings defense and the Giants defense share so many similarities. We talked about this when they met on Christmas Eve
Yeah.
only a few weeks ago. But when you think about where they get their success, they get their success getting pressure on the other quarterback. They have two guys in Zadarius Smith and Daniel Hunter who can get to the quarterback at will. They both have double-digit sacks in the year, 12 and 10 respectively, Adam.
Yep.
The blueprint is very simple. They had 11 QB hits on Daniel Jones. They had 3 sacks instead of 4 that we had against Kirk Cousins. They want to get after the quarterback.
Yeah.
We have a very similar setup with Azeez Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeau wanting to get pressure on Kirk Cousins. Oh, guess what? The Minnesota Vikings also have a very thin secondary, which is where people look to exploit. That has been one of the problems for the Giants because of injury and all the players we released early on in the season. These defenses, funnily enough, are not so dissimilar when you talk about what they want to do or how we cover up, deficiencies on that side of the ball.
No, for sure. And I think, it's funny, the tackles for a loss, which only one for the Vikings defense against us in that last meeting. And then you mentioned, pass deflections being the other key category. Didn't have a lot of those. Still end up with 4, but it's like, again, compare those two lines. You mentioned the 11 hits, like, hey, that's going to be a part of it. But every other category, the Giants offensive line held up better in theory than the Vikings offensive line did. But when we talk about the defensive front for the Vikings and how the Giants counteract that, is it just a repeatable process of saying, I mean, this is obviously one of the best wide receiver, tight end, even Saquon included. It's one of the best lines we ever saw all season, right? 8 catches apiece for James, Hodgins, and Barkley, 4 for Darius Slayton. Again, 20 yards a clip. So that's exactly what you want him to be. Take the top off of defense. Bellinger just 2 for 27. Do you think that is just a, hey, let's go ahead and repeat that same process? Because frankly, we don't have a pure number one wideout. And that's kind of an advantage when you're playing a bad secondary. It means that if the front holds up, if Evan Neal, who's a rookie, can step up and play big in this moment, then all of a sudden for Daniel Jones, it really just become about read the defense, work your progressions, take what's being given to you, and you probably can have some success. And I do have, I think, a two-pronged question when it comes to other weapons the Giants could use.
Yeah, when you think about the porous defense that the Vikings have, the game plan has to be the same. Daniel Jones has to just take what the defense gives him, get it to the open man. It doesn't matter if it's Isaiah Hodgins or Darius Slayton. He just has to get the ball out and keep the ball moving down the field. And to your point, I think it's the same game script. It doesn't matter if it's Richie James catching a 6-yard pass or Isaiah Hodgins over a slant route. The Giants need to be able to move the ball, or else, like, how are we ever going to get Saquon Barkley going in this
Yeah.
game? We know that it's so important for the Giants to get that home run hit from Saquon at some point, break a 30-yard run, get a 40-yard electric run for a touchdown, do something to change the game. We hope that it opens up enough for him. If we're not keeping them honest in the passing game, then they can essentially just stack the box and say, we're going to try to get pressure on Jones. We're going to stop Barkley. Try to throw it over our heads. You didn't do it last time.
All right, here's the two-prong question then. And actually, here's the precursor to that two-prong question, which is the third prong. I don't know. Saquon Barkley, without that 27-yard run in that last meeting, which again, you don't take it away. It's all valuable. It all factors in. But 13 carries for under 60 yards. Do you think that the Giants coming out in this game should start it out by saying, let's try to control the game, let's try to run with Saquon, or do you, and really 14 carries is not a lot, but we know he was coming back, getting his legs underneath him or his shoulder underneath him after the end of the season kind of injuries that he was working through. Do you want 20 carries? Do you want 20 carries from Saquon, or do you want 15 carries from Saquon? Do you want the team to try to pound it and control, or do you want them to maybe spread it out a little bit, knowing the susceptible defense they're playing?
So if you would have asked this question going into the season, you would have said, "Give it to our workhorse Saquon Barkley,
Right.
no questions asked. He is the gold jacket type player." And
Oh.
you know what? A funny thing happened over the regular season where
Funny thing
Daniel
happened on
Jones
the way to the playoffs, Andrew.
yeah, well, yeah, funny thing happened. We end up making the playoffs with a over 500 record, which no one thought was going to be possible. But a lot of it has to do with the evolution of Daniel Jones's game. And I think, Adam, it's all on Daniel Jones. This is no longer Saquon Barkley handed off to him and we hope for the best. And then like Daniel Jones will be a complimentary piece. He is the guy. It has to be Daniel Jones making all of the critical decisions while having the run game as a complementary piece. But I'm really looking at this saying it's not Saquon Barkley, the workhorse. I don't think he gets 20 something carries. If he does, because we're ahead in the game and they're trying
Sure.
to milk the clock, great. But I think the way that we exploit the Vikings defense is you say, Daniel Jones, you haven't really turned the ball over all year. Don't make the critical mistakes and get us points. We're relying on you, number 8.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways I look at it as, especially when you're in the shotgun or when you're looking at the line of scrimmage pre-snap, right? Daniel Jones and this isn't, I'm not knocking him. It's game script, it's just play calling. But it's the interesting moments of reading the defense and saying, here's the time to audible to the draw play, right? Like here is the time where I can get a home run hit. And a lot of times, based on some of the deficiencies the Giants have, and again, this is a Daniel Jones avoiding maybe a worse scenario, which would be calling a play where he's going to be under pressure for a sack, or the coverage is going to be there and it's going to be forcing a ball somewhere, and he's audible to, let's go to the run. And those runs end up with what? Saquon Barkley getting hit 2 or 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage or getting into the teeth of the defense, right? So, and I think it's the lesser of all evils when you make those decisions. But I do wonder, and this is about the evolution of Daniel Jones, is saying like, hey, they're bringing pressure from the right. Is it a true pressure, right? Are they bringing that blitz? Are they bringing that extra man? And if so, I need to be able to audible and say, Saquon, I want you sweeping left, right? I want you behind Andrew Thomas, and I want you trying to get out to the edge and maybe hit one of those early home runs in the running game. So I think it's about balance, but it is underneath the umbrella that you're saying. We have loved what Daniel Jones has accomplished over the course of this season. Now I think this is a great opportunity for a test for him. It's, you are the leader of this team. If you're fans of the Giants and you believe he is the franchise quarterback, well, that's what this is. This is, let's go toe to toe with Kirk Cousins and be the better quarterback in a playoff game. I think that's what it comes down to. And in that vein, I look inside the way the last game went and the wide receiver room. Some people have even said that Washington should be out there in this game for the Giants, having just signed him and walking him in the door, just because, hey, why not? Because name the guy after James, Hodgins, Slayton that you're like, obviously he's the 4th wide receiver that you put out there. One, do you think Kenny Golladay is on the field in this game after seeing him in Week 18 against the Eagles, and at a minimum, at least showing that he's healthy enough to be able to catch a touchdown pass in the back of the end zone? And then I'll follow up with my secondary receiving question.
Well, I picked Kenny Golladay as the guy to look for in the Eagles game. He ends up catching
Yep.
his first touchdown, gives him a little bit of confidence. I mean, maybe he gets a handful of snaps at him, but like I still don't trust him because there's the 17 other games of the season where I just didn't see the effort from him. Like he had
Oh,
one amazing catch.
okay, Andy. The one play doesn't outweigh the 17 games. All
It
right.
So can he make one play? Can it be a jump ball in the corner of the end zone? Do you want a jump ball in the corner of the end zone with your season on the line with Kenny Golladay? I don't know if I necessarily feel that comfortable, but that's kind of one of the areas I could see is a handful of snaps for him, maybe in the red zone.
Yeah, here's what I actually like. Like, I like somewhere early in the game, and I think we talked about this off podcast. I don't know if it was on air or not. About, like, say you're at the 16-yard line going in, right? First down, 16-yard line, 1st and 10, and you bring out the Hodgins, Slayton, Kenny Golladay, right? And Daniel Bellinger. Maybe you spread those 4 players out, right? And then you have Saquon, or we put Saquon out wide and let Bellinger start in line. Hey, Do I like taking maybe a little, a little shot there, and it can end up being Kenny Galladay, if not Darius Slayton, if not Isaiah Hodgins? Of course, right? Like, I think that, like, you can take a couple of those opportunities, to your point. And if it doesn't work out, hey, Kenny, come on off the field. We're going to look for some of those underneath stuff. We're going to look to get Richie James involved. There just is that world. And even with Richie James, because I don't know why I left him out of this equation here, but there's the world where if you go a 4 wide receiver set on a first down and Richie James is working out of the slot, just having those other 3 big bodies and saying, hey, you know what I want you guys to do? Take everybody upfield and let Richie James just have a big wide open chunk, run a low underneath route for Daniel Bellinger, or a quick out route, 5-yard out route on the sideline, and leave a lot of space for who is our kind of quickest, twitchiest player in Richie James right now to work a little bit over the middle. So I think there's a world where Kenny can offer some value, and it's okay if we don't see him at all, obviously. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
The other guy, man, I'm on a roll, dude. I'm all jacked up. I've been drinking, Mountain Dew all day. The other guy to me is Lawrence Cager. I don't know how you get entirely away from what we saw from him, not just in this game against the Eagles in the final week of the season. Because, I mean, listen, on the one hand, you can say it was a meaningless game, so you don't want to put too much stock in it. I can go the other way and say that the game maybe didn't mean anything to the Giants, but it meant everything to the Eagles. Like, they needed that to be a win for them. And if you go and you look at it from that standpoint, I have a hard time getting away from wanting the one thing we don't have inside of that wide receiver core after Richie James is that really athletic weapon. Daniel Bellinger has been incredibly consistent. He's obviously had his injury concerns. But when I go and look at the fact that you were able to use Lawrence Cager for 8 catches and 69 yards, and even go in and look inside of his game log since he came over to the New York Football Giants, there weren't a lot of big moments for him, right? Those 8 catches, guess what? That was 3 more than he had the entire time since being with the Giants. But the 2 catches, for 3 targets and 20 yards, the 1 catch on 2 targets for 20 yards, going back to the Dallas game and the Detroit game. If we talk about a couple of opportunities inside of a game, like with Kenny Galladay in the red zone, I think Lawrence Cager is another guy, man. You put him out there, you tell him to run a bit of a go route down the middle with other things happening on the outside. It may only be 7 reps in the entire game, but they can be those huge moments. And I think you and I both know, especially from Giants history and playoff history in the NFL, this is what happens. Guys you don't expect step up in some critical moments. And I wouldn't be shocked if Lawrence Cager ends up having 2 targets, 1 catch for 26 yards.
So, Adam, at the end of the day, my friend,
sure,
you kind of brought it full circle, because you asked the question at the beginning, should the Giants just do what they did last time and eliminate the turnovers? Now we're talking about Kenny Galladay being out there. Now we're talking about utilizing Lawrence Cager. So it sounds like there needs to be a little bit of an evolution, and not just rest on the idea of we're not going to turn over the ball in order to win this game. And I like that. The Giants have shown the ability to evolve over the season. I mean, think about it. Isaiah Hodgins wasn't even on this roster, a couple of weeks into the season, and now he's become a featured guy. So to your point, I think this is what Dabes and Kafka have shown all season, is to evolve with the personnel that they have to put the team in the best situation for success.
You better believe it, my friend. You get us over on YouTube, obviously. You get us over on the podcast feed as well. I don't know what we're going to do when it comes to game day. Maybe some Sunday morning action here. We have a bit of a new partnership that's coming in just at the right moment for the Giants playoff run that we'll break down here on social media. So follow us, by the way, over on Twitter at One Giant Podcast, at AMac214, at Adam Armbrecht. We'll be posting things up out there as well. So be sure to be a part of it. And of course, we'll also have our game picks and predictions coming up before the Sunday tilt. Until next time, that was Andrew Makowitz. Andrew Makowitz? Andu. It's like a sausage. And Dewey Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.